Hello and welcome to this new series on the weird and wonderful health claims, spectacularly stupid practices, and complete misunderstandings of basic science that whittle away your hope in humanity as people gradually demonstrate absolutely no comprehension of what is real and what is imaginary. The first of these events this week is something called Peganism, the bastard love child of veganism and paleo diets. This diet was proposed by someone named Mark Hyman. In 2018, he released a book called Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? And since this book's debut, there has been an increasing interest in various search engines and similar that have led to it being suggested to a wider audience. The idea behind it is to buy colourful and bright vegetables and fruit that make up the bulk of your diet. This is a relatively good suggestion in the terms of most fads. Most diets will focus on one food group to the exclusion of the others, but to select for generally fruit and vegetables is not a particular problem. However, what this diet gets wrong is that it advises that you treat meat as a substitute for condiments like sauce, that you should forgo legumes and beans. These two food groups are generally where you're going to get your protein from. Not only that, but a large amount of dietary fiber. Forgoing them is simply a bad idea. Further to this misguided advice is the instruction that you should generally avoid any kind of sugar, or at least limit it to an occasional treat, which is reasonable. But they then extend this to exclude things like pesticides, antibiotics, GMO ingredients, chemicals, preservatives, artificial flavors, MSG, and artificial sweeteners. Now, half of these aren't even a concern in most cases. For example, pesticides and antibiotics simply aren't sold in most commercial food. Hormones are much the same, with limited exceptions. GMO ingredients are more or less scaremongering, as there is almost no generally available foodstuff that is a GMO, barring grapefruit. Chemicals and additives are just there. Anything is a chemical, and anything can be an additive. Hydrogen monoxide, better known as water, is a chemical. Salt, or sodium chloride, is an additive and used as a preservative. Both additives and preservatives are seen as bad, and yet salt is both good for you in small doses and essential for life. Artificial colours are almost a given in most cases. MSG is naturally occurring, and as for artificial sweeteners, well, if you're looking to be on a diet, they're not exactly a bad idea. Sadly, the author seems to believe in a rather bizarre concept, which is if his make-believe friend designed it, then it's good. If a farmer has grown it and developed it, it's bad. However, he seems to have missed the rather important fact that, over millennia, humans have substantially altered nearly every food you eat, and so it's nothing like what his God would have made. Therefore, everything that he says you should be eating is in fact not supposed to be eaten by that logic. And that is the fundamental rule that underpins this entire crazy diet. Next are the stirrings that magic mushrooms may soon be decriminalized in some states in America. Magic mushrooms are psychoactive, and they have been illegal in many states since the 70s, and the rolling war on drugs. Although it's unlikely to succeed, as other cases in other states have failed, it's worth noting that they may reduce penalties and reduce the restrictions on magic mushrooms as a consequence of this bill being introduced. As a consequence, there's liable to be a spike in medical cases involving magic mushrooms, particularly in Oregon. Next is the rather interesting impact of all those tattoos you are likely to get as a millennial. The ink used in them is liable to have a significant amount of metal, enough metal as it turns out to react to an MRI. The MRI will more or less pull all of that metal straight out of your skin, causing you considerable pain if they don't outright refuse you the process. In less extreme cases, rather than ripping the dye from your skin, it will instead react with it and create enough heat to burn you. There is an example from 2011 with just such an occurrence. The problem does not just end there, where you have between a 0.17 and 0.3% chance of having an adverse reaction. These same tattoos can create false artifacts in your imaging which can be mistaken for something other than what they are. And diagnostically, this can lead to errors. Next is an old case that has found its way into the media once more. In 2011, a 20-year-old Belgian student was cooking his meals for the week and prepared pasta and tomato sauce. He waited 5 days to eat this meal. Due to misfortune, he left it exposed to the worst possible conditions for these 5 days, between 5 degrees centigrade and 65 degrees centigrade. As a consequence of this, the bacteria, B. cereus, developed in his food. He became infected with it, and it more or less destroyed his liver. The other effects from eating this bacterium led to his death that night. This is a case of simply not exercising good food handling practices. If you do not handle your food in a way that is safe, you may only wind up with food poisoning or a slightly upset stomach, but the gamut can go as far as death, and that's an issue with this case in particular. The intentions were good, the idea was good, the execution was abysmal. And while this is only one example that has come up again this week in particular, it's something to be mindful of. People tend to ignore basic food safety when they are cooking and cleaning. In the same vein of people simply not understanding and doing the right thing are salt lamps. Recently, the channel Veritasium looked at this and found that there's no detectable presence of the negative ions that are supposed to provide the health benefits that are claimed by the people selling them. It is, quite simply, a far-fetched gimmick of the hippies. The worst part is, there is research going back more than 100 years that proves there is no benefit to salt lamps. Over 100 years of research, and people continue to fall prey to the pseudoscience and woo that is pretty lights in a rock. In a similar vein of old-time gimmicks is the yo-yo performer who basically destroyed the tools of his trade. Dazzling Dave, as he is known, caused his veins to constrict in a process called a vasospasm. This prevented blood from getting through to his fingers that he used for yo-yo tricks. The reason for this isn't exactly clear, with some speculating it's caused by the positioning of the string and it being tight. Dave himself believes it's a consequence of having the yo-yo hit his hand when it is being used for his tricks. Unfortunately, despite the possibility of the finger needing to be amputated in the future, if this issue resurges, he's gone back to using his toys. That's okay though. Dave might be able to speak to the Chinese community that has been taking organs from prisoners for transplant research. Or so the story has come out. Researchers in China cannot use organs from executed people or ones obtained without consent from the donor. This rule doesn't apply to just China. It is generally an international standard that most ethics committees must approve the collection and source of any donated tissues. This story comes out of a rather alarming analysis of published studies. 445 studies published in peer-reviewed English journals between 2000 and 2017 were evaluated. The researchers found that just under 86,000 organs were reportedly used in all of these studies. Nearly all of the studies failed to take note of where the organs came from and if they were given by consent. Most of the authors and the studies involved deny any sort of conduct and claim instead the protection of their ethics board. This is a false defense, as was seen with the case of Dr. He and the CRISPR babies. An ethics board may, at least in theory, give you approval. However, if they're working on the wrong information, they're not providing an informed approval for your actions. As with Dr. He, these studies may not have been given their ethics board the entire picture. This is only further compounded by the fact that analyses of the official donor registries of China and the number of transplants that actually occur do not match. There are significantly more organs transplanted than there are donors in China. These 6 stories alone are just the tip of the iceberg. They highlight how dumb decisions made today will haunt you for the rest of your life, failure to apply fairly basic food safety, inability to use and understand how ethics in science applies, and what kind of stupid diet has started 2019 for us. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions below.